time. We appreciate it. So where do you stand on the future of the Pac-12? And yes, Notre Dame, Big Ten TV deal, Pac-12. Where do you see what's going to happen to the Pac-12?
That's to me the first major domino from a realignment standpoint in terms of the potential ripple effects thereafter, and that it's the first conference standing in conference realignment that will be impacted because its grant of rights is up first. That's why. If the shoe were on the other foot and the Big 12's grant of rights is up 1 year before the Pac-12, then it would be the Big 12 being the first domino potentially. But it's the reverse. It's the Pac-12's grant of rights is up, in August of 24, and basically the Big 12 is 1 year later. So from that perspective, that's the big unknown, and that's the first domino in the sequence. But to me, the first thing that really has to be decided, and not looking past whatever Notre Dame may or may not decide regarding its affiliation and future, that to me is related and obviously very important, but the playoff is the first true domino in all of this. Because for any league, whether we're talking about the Pac-12 or what's the future of the Big 12, is their future somehow together, though that certainly does not appear to be the case at the moment. None of it, none of these hypotheticals, none of these discussions, none of these lobbing of grenades between commissioners or university presidents means a lick on either conference if the playoff doesn't include access for one or both conferences as it does now. If either of them gets shut out or both of them get shut out because the playoff and the postseason looks very different beginning in 2026, then it doesn't matter who aligns with who if you're not part of whatever and whoever has access to the playoff. So that, to me, is the first decision that really matters. Could Notre Dame obviously potentially influence some of that? Sure. But ultimately, I think the decision about what the playoff looks like beginning in 26, when its new contract begins, is what's going to drive everything thereafter.
So, James, if there is a 12 to 16 team playoff, obviously that would be good news for everybody, but in particular those A5, Power 5 conferences. But even if there is a playoff expansion, you think that they would still be on shaky ground?
Well, why do you say it's obvious that 12 or 16 is good for everybody?
Well, because you would think that you got to fill it with somebody, right? You can't just keep going down the list of what would be mediocre.
But you're operating, but you're starting from the assumption point that expansion means that it's an expanded playoff field that includes all the entities sitting at the table as they do today.
Well, wouldn't they be the ones who have to vote on it?
No. Not to start in 26, no. To start early, when we were addressing the 12-team proposal last year, which was to start in 2024, 2 years early, yes, it required unanimous approval from all 11 conferences and Notre Dame sitting at the table. That got voted down. So now we're up to the conversation of what starts in 26 with a new contract, whether it's expanded or not. Is it 8? Is it 12? Is it 16? Are there auto bids? Are there not? But who has to decide that starting in 26 is whoever makes a decision, not all 11. It could be a subgroup of that 11, and that subgroup could be 2.
That's what Bill Hancock, and there's a couple of things he told us we didn't agree with, but one of the things he said is there's not going to be any changes until 26. I mean, that's done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At this point, and I know that's not satisfying for a lot of people, but fact is, guys, there's national championships and bowl allotments and all these things are tied in, and you don't just create a new postseason. I don't want to hear about, oh, well, in 20 they figured it out. Yeah, in 20 everything in the system got figured out. But you're talking about a situation where you've got committees for the national championship and cities who have bid on this process to have a standalone championship game and allotments for and I realize the year 25 seems far off, but like nobody's going to make any adjustments obviously for this season. 23 is gone. So no, the whole conversation was about doing it for 24, 25. And by voting it down, this past June, ultimately, for the proposal that came forth a year ago, yeah, we're looking at 26, in which case, again, don't start with the assumption then that who decides what the playoff looks like in 26 and how many teams and what the structure is does not have to be all 11 conferences in Notre Dame making that decision at all. It doesn't require unanimous approval at all. The only thing that required all 11 and unanimous was to do it before 26. Starting in 26, as few as one, theoretically, could make a decision, which is why, it's a little bit of saber rattling, but why you heard Greg Sankey talk about that 2 months ago is, well, we literally have nothing beginning in 26. So, the SEC has a SEC-only playoff, format lying around in a, filing cabinet somewhere. Now, of course, we all know in a practical world that's not going to happen, but you have to acknowledge that starting in 26, there is no postseason format right now. That's what we're discussing. So why do I say it's the first domino to fall? Because I don't operate from the assumption that all 11 entities that are presently represented will automatically sit back at the table and be represented again.
So where does that leave the Pac-12 in your mind, timeline-wise?
The clock is ticking on the Pac-12, and its extinction is in 2 years from yesterday. So until and unless they have a grant of rights that says otherwise, their grant of rights ceases August 2nd, 2024. That's what's on paper. Now, we say, well, they're in TV negotiations. They could extend that, of course. Right. But both sides of the table, if you're the Pac-12 or any member of the Pac-12, why would you agree to a grant of rights for any period of time beyond 2026? Right now it's into August of 24. Why would you agree to anything beyond the end of the playoff as it presently stands without knowing if you have access to the postseason going forward? If you tie yourself up, if you're the Pac-12, if you're Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Utah, whoever, and you agreed to a grant of rights for 5 more years to 2029, but then the Big Ten and SEC decide to hold the playoff starting in 26, and you've just agreed to your grant of rights based on the idea that you'd be included, but now you're not included. Well, now you just tied up your grant of rights, and you're not even included in the playoff. So what do you do? Conversely, if you're Fox or ESPN or Amazon or whoever is bidding on, the media deal for the Pac-12, why would you agree to anything beyond 26 without knowing if the conference you're paying the rights for? Why is the television inventory valuable? Well, because it's college football and people care. Right, they care because if the stakes matter and the teams are good. 2 of the biggest brands and the biggest market in the Pac-12 are leaving. We know that. Okay. They have not always been the most successful. Historically, obviously, USC, no question. But obviously, UCLA has not been. And in the last 10, 15 years, they have not been the most successful teams in the league. We know that. All right. But why would, if you're bidding for it, Fox, ESPN, whoever, would you agree to any number without knowing, again, about the playoff? And since they're the same entities that are going to be bidding on whatever the new playoff is also, that's why I say that's the first decision that matters here is expansion, playoff expansion, what's the format, and who is included in said format. And I personally, maybe it's just me being jaded, cynical, Machiavellian, but I don't believe until it happens that we should just assume that the Power Five as we know it and the Group of Five and Notre Dame, those 11 entities will just sit back at the table and manage to decide and come to a decision, even if it's just majority decision or supermajority, as to what that looks like beginning in 26. Because particularly if you're Kevin Warren or Greg Sankey these days, other than with each other, you really don't need all the others. Now, do you?
No.
That would be one of the most college football messed up things to do after all this time of fans wanting an expanded playoff. Say, yes, we'll expand it, but we'll restrict who can get in it. Counteracts.
That's college football, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there'll be 12 teams.
Exactly. That's why I say that's why I asked you when you said, oh, well, if it goes to 12 or 16, it'll be good for everybody. I said, whoa, why? What if it's a 12 or 16, but it's half Big Ten and half SEC? Right. Now, nobody down there is going to complain. Nobody from those leagues is going to complain. But how about everybody else? Well, that's the first – why do I call it the first domino? Because especially with the timelines of the Pac-12 and the Big 12's grant of rights expiring in the next 2 and 3 years, if the Big Ten and SEC did this, and I say if, I'm not guaranteeing it's happening. I'm not telling you it's going to happen. I'm saying it's possible. So if it did, well, then it's not just, oh, well, they're just going to both sit at 16. If they create a barrier to entry into the postseason, whereby you must be a member of their league to get in the first place, well, then you've driven up the value of being bigger, quite frankly. You've changed the math of TV distribution and what it means, geography and all those things, because if being in one of the two super leagues is the barrier in the first place, well, then geographic ties are less relevant. It just becomes about overall television strength and performance of your program and resources. So, yes, I'm not, again, do I think we get there eventually in college football? Yes. Do I know if that's going to happen in the next 2 to 4 years or 14 years? No. But right now, just go by what's on paper and what the money says. That's it. Everything else about geography, about tradition, about rivalries, stop. We know what the money. We have seen enough reports about what the money is. We'll find out what the Big Ten's deal eventually is here in the not too distant future. But it's going to be so enormous that how could anyone at a Pac-12, or again for the Big 12 for that matter, how could anyone sit there as the university president or chancellor and say, yes, I want to agree to an extension of our grant of rights for somewhere in the ballpark of a decade, and I'm going to put my institution 40, 50, 60, $70 million behind Rutgers every year.
Yeah,
that's going to be acceptable. That's going to be something that people who are in those chairs have a fiduciary responsibility to sign that contract and put their institution in the best position to succeed on a field, competitively, economically, you name it. And you're going to sign on a contract that says, yeah, tie me up for 6, 8, 10 years, and we're going to be $60 million annually behind Illinois, Purdue, and Rutgers.
James, again, Crepea with us.